I never told my son I made $60,000 a month. I let him believe I was barely scraping by, living in my modest rental, driving my 15-year-old sedan with the cracked windshield I never bothered to fix. But the truth is, I wanted to see who he'd become without my money shaping him. I wanted to know if he'd stand by me when he thought I had nothing. That test was supposed to come quietly, over years. Instead, it came crashing down the night he invited me to meet his wife's parents, and I decided to walk through their door as the broke, naive old man he already believed I was. The second I stepped inside, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. If you love your grandchildren and want them to make it in life, kindly subscribe and comment because I will respond to all comments under this video. The house was massive, not just big rich, the kind of rich that whispers instead of shouts. Marble floors stretched under chandeliers that probably cost more than I made in a year, even with my hidden salary. The air smelled like expensive candles, something floral and cold. I stood there in my worn jacket, the one with the fraying cuffs, holding a bottle of discount wine I'd picked up on purpose. I wanted them to see me as small, harmless, poor. My son, Aaron, stood beside his wife, Vanessa, in the foyer. He didn't hug me. He didn't even smile. He just glanced at the wine bottle in my hand and looked away, his jaw tight. Vanessa's eyes flicked over me like I was a stain on the marble. Then her mother appeared. Eleanor. That's what Vanessa called her, not Mom, but Eleanor. She glided down the staircase in a silk dress that probably cost what I pretend to make in 6 months. Her heels clicked sharp and precise. She looked at me the way you'd look at something tracked in from the yard. Her smile was thin, practiced, venomous. "So you're William," she said, and my name sounded dirty coming out of her mouth. She didn't offer her hand. She just turned to Aaron and said, "You didn't mention he'd be dressed so casually." Aaron's face went red, but he didn't defend me. He just mumbled something about me not having much notice. Vanessa touched her mother's arm and whispered, "It's fine, Mother. He won't stay long." I stood there holding my cheap wine, feeling the weight of their judgment like a coat soaked in rain, and I thought, this is what my son has become. This is the family he chose. And he's ashamed of me. Dinner hadn't even started and I already wanted to leave. But I didn't, because I needed to see how far this would go, how cruel people become when they think you're beneath them, how silent my son would stay while they tore me apart. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. Eleanor led us into a dining room that looked like it belonged in a museum. The table stretched long and glossy under a chandelier that threw light like broken glass. Vanessa's father, Richard, sat at the head already, barely looking up from his phone when I walked in. He was broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man used to being obeyed. When he finally acknowledged me, it was with a nod so slight I almost missed it. "William," he said flatly, like my name bored him. I nodded back. I didn't trust my voice yet. We sat. I was placed at the far end across from Aaron, next to Vanessa's younger brother, Kyle, who looked at me like I might steal the silverware. The first course came out, some kind of soup in a shallow white bowl, garnished with something green I didn't recognize. I picked up my spoon and started eating. It tasted like nothing. Eleanor watched me from across the table, her eyes sharp. "So, William," she said, her voice sweet and poisonous, "Aaron tells us you're between jobs right now." I paused, spoon halfway to my mouth. Aaron wouldn't meet my eyes. I set the spoon down carefully. "That's right," I said quietly. "Been a tough few months." She smiled. "I'm sure. It must be hard at your age trying to find work. What is it you did again? Manual labor." The table went quiet. Richard glanced up from his phone, interested now. Kyle smirked into his napkin. Vanessa stared at her soup like she could disappear into it. And Aaron, my son, the boy I raised, said nothing. I could have told them the truth right then. I could have said I ran a consulting firm that brought in millions, that I had investment portfolios they couldn't even pronounce, that this little performance was a test they were failing spectacularly. But I didn't. I just nodded slowly and said, "I did carpentry for a long time. Good honest work." Eleanor's smile widened. "Oh, how quaint. Vanessa, did you hear that? Your father-in-law is a carpenter, like Jesus." She laughed, light and sharp, and Richard chuckled. Kyle grinned outright. I felt my hands tighten on the edge of the table, but I kept my face calm, measured. I glanced at Aaron, hoping, praying he'd say something. Anything. He just stared at his bowl, his face pale, his mouth a hard line. Vanessa touched his hand under the table. "It's fine," she murmured, like I was the problem, like my existence here was the embarrassment. Richard leaned back in his chair, sizing me up like livestock. "So what's the plan, William? You looking for handouts, or are you actually going to try and get back on your feet?" The question hit like a slap. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm managing," I said. "I don't need anyone's help." He snorted. "That's not what Aaron said. He mentioned you've been asking him for money." I froze. My eyes snapped to Aaron. He wouldn't look at me. His face was red, his jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. He didn't correct his father-in-law. He just sat there, silent, and let the lie hang in the air like smoke. I've never asked my son for a single dollar, not once, not ever, and he knew that. But in that moment, in front of these people, he let them believe I was a burden, a leech, someone to be pitied and scorned. I felt something crack inside me, something I didn't know could break. And Eleanor set down her spoon with a delicate clink. "Well, Richard, we can't let family suffer, can we?" Her tone was mocking, theatrical. "Perhaps we could find him some work. Doesn't your company need groundskeepers?" Richard grinned. "Good idea. We could always use someone to mow the lawns, trim the hedges. What do you say, William? $20 an hour sound fair?" Kyle laughed outright this time. Vanessa's lips twitched. And Aaron, God help me. Aaron looked down at his lap and said nothing. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, felt the blood pounding in my ears. I could have stood up. I could have walked out. But I didn't, because I needed to see how far my son would let this go, how deep his shame of me ran. How much of the boy I raised was left inside the man sitting across from me. I smiled, calm, polite, broken. "That's kind of you," I said quietly, "but I'll manage on my own." Eleanor tilted her head, studying me like a bug under glass. "Pride," she said softly. "That's what keeps people like you poor, William. You're too proud to accept help, too stubborn to admit when you're drowning." I met her eyes. For the first time that night, I let a little of the truth slip through. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I just know my worth." Her smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Richard cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Well, let's not ruin dinner with talk of work. Vanessa, tell your mother about the vacation you two are planning." And just like that, I was dismissed, erased. The conversation moved on without me. I sat at the end of that long table surrounded by wealth and cruelty, and I realized something that cut deeper than anything they'd said. My son didn't defend me because he didn't think I was worth defending. The rest of the meal blurred. I ate in silence while they talked around me, their laughter sharp and foreign. Every so often Eleanor would glance my way with that thin, poisonous smile, and I'd nod politely, playing my part. The broke old man, the embarrassment, the cautionary tale. When dessert was served, some kind of chocolate thing dusted with gold flakes, Aaron finally spoke to me. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice tight. "You okay?" I looked at him, really looked at him, saw the boy I used to know buried somewhere under the shame and the silence, and I nodded. "I'm fine, son." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. But he didn't push. He just turned back to Vanessa, who whispered something in his ear that made him frown. I wondered if he even remembered who I used to be to him, or if that man was gone. After dinner, Richard offered me a ride home in a tone that made it clear he wanted me gone. I declined politely, said I'd call a cab. Eleanor walked me to the door, her heels clicking on the marble like a countdown. At the threshold, she paused and looked at me with something almost like pity. "William," she said softly, "I hope you understand. We only want what's best for Aaron and Vanessa, and sometimes that means protecting them from, well, difficult situations." I met her eyes. "I understand perfectly." She smiled, satisfied, and closed the door in my face. I stood there on the steps of that massive house under the cold night sky, holding my cheap bottle of wine they never even opened. And I made a decision. They wanted to see me as poor, as weak, as something to pity and discard. Fine. I'd let them. But soon, very soon, they'd see exactly who I really was, and by then it would be too late for apologies. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my small rental house, the one with the peeling paint and the leaky faucet I never fixed, and I stared at the wall until sunrise. The humiliation should have faded by morning, but it didn't. It sat in my chest like a stone, cold and heavy. What kept replaying in my mind wasn't Eleanor's cruelty or Richard's condescension. It was Aaron's silence. The way he looked away when they offered me groundskeeper work. The way he let them believe I'd been begging him for money. My own son. The boy I taught to ride a bike, to stand up for himself, to never let anyone make him feel small. He'd watch them make me invisible, and he'd help them do it. I picked up my phone and stared at his name in my contacts. My finger hovered over the call button. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted him to explain. But I didn't call, because deep down, I was afraid of what he might say. The coffee I made tasted like ash. I sat at my small kitchen table, the morning light filtering through the thin curtains, and I thought about the life I'd built in secret. The consulting firm I'd grown from nothing. The investments that multiplied while I drove my old car and wore my frayed jackets. I'd done it all quietly, deliberately, because I wanted Aaron to build his own life. I didn't want my money to be a crutch or a cage. I wanted him to be strong, independent, proud of what he earned. But somewhere along the way, he'd learned to be ashamed of where he came from instead, and I'd let it happen. I'd been so focused on not spoiling him with wealth that I never realized I was teaching him I wasn't worth defending. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I set down my coffee cup, my hands shaking slightly. What would you have done if your own son let strangers humiliate you without saying a word? Would you have walked away, or would you have stayed to see how deep the betrayal went? My phone buzzed. A text from Aaron. "Dad, sorry about last night. Eleanor can be intense. Hope you got home okay." That was it. No apology for the lies. No acknowledgement of what he'd let happen. Just a casual dismissal. Like the whole evening had been mildly awkward instead of soul-crushing. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I'm fine, thanks for having me." I almost added more, almost told him how much it hurt. But I didn't, because I needed to see what he'd do next. If he'd reach out again, if he'd realize what he'd done, if any part of the boy I raised was still in there, buried under Vanessa's expectations and Eleanor's poison. I hit send and set the phone down. It didn't buzz again. I spent the next week doing something I hadn't done in years. I watched my son from a distance. Not physically, I'm not a stalker, but I paid attention in ways I hadn't before. I looked at his social media, something I'd always ignored. Vanessa's Instagram was a shrine to their life. Expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, designer clothes, and in every photo Aaron looked perfect, polished, successful. Nothing like the boy who used to come home with dirt on his knees and laughter in his eyes. In one photo, they were at some charity gala. Vanessa wore a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, the rent I actually paid, not the one I could afford. Aaron stood beside her in a tailored suit, his arm around her waist, his smile practiced and empty. The caption read, "So grateful for the life we're building together. Family is everything." I stared at that word, family, and I wondered if he even thought of me when he wrote it. I called my lawyer on Thursday. Martin had handled my business affairs for 20 years. He knew about the money, the investments, the careful structure I'd built to keep my wealth invisible. "William," he said when he picked up, his voice warm and familiar. "It's been a while. Everything okay?" I hesitated. Then I said, "I need you to draw up some documents. Quietly." There was a pause. "What kind of documents?" I told him. I explained what I wanted to do, how I wanted to structure it, and why. When I finished, the line was silent for a long moment. Then Martin said carefully, "Are you sure about this? Once you do this, there's no taking it back." I looked around my small kitchen, at the chipped countertop and the faded linoleum. "I'm sure," I said. "Good," he said quietly. "I'll have everything ready by next week. And William, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing." I wasn't sure if he was right, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Friday afternoon, Aaron called. Not texted, called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Hey, Dad," he said, and his voice sounded strained, tired. "Hey, son." There was a pause. I could hear noise in the background, voices, the clink of glasses. He was somewhere public. "Listen," he said. "Vanessa and I are having a little gathering tomorrow night. Just close friends and family. Her parents will be there. I was hoping you could come." My stomach tightened. "Aaron." "I know last time was rough," he interrupted quickly. "But this will be different. Smaller, more casual. And I think it would mean a lot to Vanessa if you were there. Not if it would mean a lot to him, if it would mean a lot to Vanessa." I closed my eyes. "What time?" I could hear the relief in his voice. 7. "I'll text you the address. And Dad? Maybe, dress a little nicer this time. Nothing fancy, just, nicer." The words stung more than he probably meant them to. "I'll see what I can do," I said quietly. "Great. See you tomorrow." He hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there holding the phone, feeling something cold settle in my chest. He'd invited me, but not because he wanted me there, because Vanessa wanted to show me off again, or maybe show me up. Another chance to prove to her parents that Aaron came from nothing, that he'd risen above his embarrassing poor father. Another opportunity to make me small, and he'd asked me to dress nicer. Like my worn jacket and old shoes were the problem. Like if I just looked a little more presentable, I'd be worthy of their table. I thought about saying no, about texting him back and declining politely. But I didn't, because I wanted to see it again. I needed to confirm what I already knew, that my son had changed so completely that he didn't even recognize what he'd become, and that the family he'd married into had turned him into someone I barely recognized. Saturday came too fast. I spent the morning going through my closet, looking at the clothes I actually owned, the ones I never wore. Custom suits I'd bought years ago for business meetings I conducted under a different name. Italian leather shoes still in their boxes. Silk ties that cost more than the discount wine I'd brought to Eleanor's house. I picked out the simplest suit I had, charcoal gray, understated but clearly expensive if you knew what to look for. I polished the shoes until they gleamed. I knotted the tie with practiced precision. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like the man I actually was. Successful, confident, wealthy. And I realized that's not what Aaron wanted to see. He wanted the poor father, the one he could pity and dismiss, the one who made him look good by comparison. So I took it all off. I put on khakis that were a little too loose, a button-down shirt that was clean but worn at the collar. I found an old blazer in the back of my closet, one with slightly outdated lapels. I looked at myself again. There he was. The man Aaron was ashamed of. The man Eleanor and Richard could sneer at. The man I'd pretended to be. And tonight I'd pretend one last time. I arrived at 7 exactly. The gathering was at Aaron and Vanessa's home, a sleek modern house in a gated community I'd never visited. I parked my old sedan between a Mercedes and a Tesla, and felt a familiar pang of something, shame or anger. I couldn't tell anymore. The front door opened before I could knock. Vanessa stood there in a white cocktail dress, her smile tight and artificial. "William," she said, her eyes flicking over my outfit with barely concealed disappointment. "You made it." I held up a bottle of wine, better than last time, but still nothing special. "Wouldn't miss it." She took the bottle without looking at it and stepped aside. "Everyone's out back. Aaron's grilling." I followed her through the house. It was beautiful, all clean lines and expensive furniture, but it felt cold, like a showroom, like nobody actually lived there. We stepped out onto a large patio where maybe 15 people stood in small groups, holding drinks and laughing. I recognized Eleanor and Richard immediately. They were holding court near the outdoor fireplace, surrounded by people who looked just like them. Polished, privileged, cruel. Aaron saw me and waved from the grill, his smile uncertain. I walked over. "Hey, Dad, glad you could make it." He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure which version of me would show up. "Wouldn't have missed it," I said again, and I meant it differently than Vanessa had. He gestured to the grill, where steaks sizzled and popped. "Hope you're hungry. I'm making my specialty." I smiled. "I remember. You learned from the best." For a second, just a second, something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked like the boy I used to know. Then Vanessa appeared at his elbow. "Aaron, your mother's asking for you." He hesitated, glanced at me, then nodded. "Be right back, Dad. Help yourself to a drink." He walked away and I was alone. I poured myself a beer from the cooler, something imported and expensive, and I stood at the edge of the patio watching these people laugh and talk about things that didn't matter. And I waited, because I knew what was coming. I could feel it in the air, thick and inevitable. The moment when Eleanor or Richard would notice me standing here in my cheap blazer and outdated shoes. The moment when they'd say something cutting and cruel. And the moment when I'd finally see if my son would stand up for me, or if I'd lost him completely. Eleanor spotted me first. I watched her eyes lock onto me from across the patio, watched her lean toward Richard and whisper something behind her hand. He turned, looked at me, and his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. They moved through the crowd like sharks circling, deliberate and unhurried. I took a sip of my beer and stayed where I was. Running would only make it worse. Eleanor arrived first, her perfume reaching me before she did, something floral and overpowering that made my throat tight. "William," she said, drawing out my name like it amused her. "I'm so glad you could join us. Richard and I were just saying how brave it was of you to come back after, well, you know." I didn't know, or rather, I did, but I wanted to hear her say it. "After what?" Her smile sharpened. "After last week. I know it must have been difficult for you, being around so much, well, success. People from different worlds and all that." Richard appeared at her shoulder, drink in hand, looking at me like I was a stain on his daughter's perfect patio. "We were actually surprised Aaron invited you again," he said casually, "given how uncomfortable you seemed." The words were designed to wound, and they did. But I kept my face neutral, my voice calm. "I wasn't uncomfortable," I said quietly. "Just observing." Eleanor's eyebrow arched. "Observing what, exactly?" I met her eyes. "How people treat others they think are beneath them." The air went cold. Richard's jaw tightened. Eleanor's smile froze on her face, brittle as glass. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Eleanor laughed, sharp and cutting. "Oh, William, we don't think you're beneath us. We just worry about Aaron, that's all. about the influence certain family members might have on his future. She said family members like it was a disease, like I was something contagious that might infect their perfect lives. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and dangerous, but I swallowed it down. I only want what's best for my son, I said. Of course you do, Richard said, his tone dripping with condescension. But sometimes what's best is knowing when to step back. Aaron's building something here, a real life, the kind of stability he never had growing up. The implication hung in the air like smoke, that I'd failed him, that I hadn't given him enough, that everything he had now came in spite of me, not because of me. I wanted to tell them the truth right then, wanted to pull out my phone and show them my bank statements, my investment portfolios, the consulting contracts worth more than Richard probably made in 5 years. But I didn't, because across the patio, I could see Aaron watching us. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. Vanessa stood beside him, her hand on his arm, whispering something urgent. And I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach turn, that he wasn't going to help me. Not this time either. Eleanor followed my gaze and smiled. He's grown into such a fine young man, hasn't he? Vanessa's been wonderful for him, helped him see what he's truly capable of. She paused, then added softly, helped him understand what he deserves. The message was clear. I wasn't what he deserved. I was something to overcome, something to leave behind. Before I could respond, one of the other guests drifted over, a woman in her 50s wearing diamonds that caught the firelight. Eleanor, darling, you must introduce me to your guest. Eleanor's smile turned predatory. Of course. Patricia, this is William, Aaron's father. She said it like an apology. Patricia looked me up and down, her eyes pausing on my worn blazer, my scuffed shoes. Oh, she said, and that single syllable contained volumes. How lovely. And what do you do, William? I could feel Eleanor and Richard watching, waiting to see how I'd embarrass myself, waiting for me to confirm every assumption they'd made about me. I'm between opportunities right now, I said quietly. Patricia's expression shifted to something like pity. Oh, that's difficult, especially at your age. The job market can be so unforgiving. She touched my arm lightly, the gesture somehow more insulting than Eleanor's cruelty. But I'm sure something will come along, you just have to stay positive. Eleanor leaned in conspiratorially. Richard was just suggesting William might do well in landscaping. He has such a strong work ethic. Patricia nodded enthusiastically. Oh, that's a wonderful idea. Physical labor keeps you young, and there's no shame in honest work. No shame in honest work, as if that's all I was capable of, as if my worth could be measured by how well I trimmed hedges or mowed lawns. I felt something inside me begin to crack, the careful control I'd maintained since walking through the door starting to fracture. I glanced at Aaron again. He'd moved closer, close enough to hear now, close enough to intervene. His face was tight, conflicted, but he still didn't speak. Vanessa's grip on his arm had tightened, her knuckles white. Richard cleared his throat. You know, William, I've been thinking. We're always looking for reliable maintenance staff at my properties. Pays decent, nothing extravagant, but steady. I could put in a word for you if you're interested. The offer landed like a slap. Around us, the conversation had quieted. People were listening now, pretending not to, but clearly invested in watching the poor father get offered charity by his son's wealthy in-laws. I opened my mouth to refuse, to tell him exactly where he could put his maintenance job, when Aaron finally moved. He stepped forward, his face flushed, and for one desperate moment I thought he was going to defend me. Thought he was going to tell Richard that his father didn't need handouts, that I'd raised him to be better than this, that he wouldn't stand by while they humiliated me. Instead, he said, Dad, maybe you should think about it. Richard's offering to help. It could be good for you. Give you some structure. The world tilted. Everything went quiet except for the ringing in my ears. My son, my own son, not defending me, not even staying silent anymore, actively joining them, encouraging me to accept their scraps. I looked at Aaron, really looked at him, and I didn't recognize the man standing there. This wasn't the boy who used to help me in my workshop, who'd listened to my stories about building things with your own hands, who'd once told me I was his hero. This was someone else. Someone Vanessa and Eleanor and Richard had shaped into their image. Someone who'd learned that money and status mattered more than loyalty, more than family, more than me. Aaron, I said quietly, my voice barely steady. Can we talk? Privately? He glanced at Vanessa. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. Dad, everyone's here. This isn't really the time. Please, I said, and I hated how the word sounded. Like begging. He hesitated, torn, then nodded reluctantly. Okay, just for a minute. We walked to the far corner of the patio, away from the others, though I could feel their eyes following us. Eleanor's smile, Richard's satisfaction, Patricia's pity. When we were out of earshot, I turned to face my son. Why are you doing this? I asked. Aaron looked away, his jaw working. Doing what? Letting them treat me like this, like I'm nothing, like I'm something to be ashamed of. He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. Dad, they're just trying to help. You're reading too much into it. Help? The word came out harsher than I intended. They're humiliating me, Aaron. And you're letting them. You're helping them. His face hardened. Maybe if you'd made different choices, we wouldn't be in this situation. The words hit like a physical blow. I actually stepped back. What choices? I asked quietly. What are you talking about? He gestured vaguely, angrily. You know what I'm talking about. The small house, the old car. Never having enough. Do you know what it was like growing up that way? Watching other kids have things I couldn't? Being embarrassed to bring friends over? My throat tightened. I gave you everything I could. It wasn't enough. The words exploded out of him, loud enough that several people on the patio turned to look. He lowered his voice, but the anger remained. It wasn't enough, Dad, and now Vanessa's family is offering to help you and you're too proud to take it. I stared at my son, feeling something break inside me that I knew would never heal. Is that what you think? That I failed you? He didn't answer. He just looked away, his silence more damning than any words. I took a breath, steadying myself. I never asked you for anything, Aaron, not once, and I certainly never asked for their charity. Maybe you should have, he said bitterly. Maybe if you'd been willing to accept help, to admit you needed it, things would have been different. Better. Better. Like our life together had been a failure. Like everything I'd sacrificed, every choice I'd made to raise him without spoiling him with money he hadn't earned, had been a mistake. I wanted to tell him the truth then. Wanted to explain that I'd had the money all along, that I'd chosen to live simply to teach him values, to show him that worth wasn't measured in dollars. But looking at him now, at the resentment in his eyes and the shame on his face, I realized the truth wouldn't matter. Because the problem wasn't that he thought I was poor. The problem was that he thought being poor made me worthless. I should go, I said quietly. Aaron nodded, relief flickering across his face. Yeah, maybe that's best. I'll call you later, okay? I didn't believe him, but I nodded anyway. I walked back across the patio, feeling every eye on me, hearing the whispers start before I'd even reached the door. Eleanor touched my arm as I passed. Leaving so soon, William? We were just starting to have fun. I looked at her cruel smile and her expensive dress and her complete lack of humanity. Thank you for your hospitality, I said, my voice flat. It's been enlightening. I didn't wait for her response. I walked through Aaron's beautiful cold house and out the front door. My old car sat between the Mercedes and the Tesla like a rebuke. I got in, started the engine, and sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Through the window, I could see them all on the patio, laughing and talking like nothing had happened, like I'd never been there at all. And I could see Aaron standing next to Vanessa, her arm around his waist, both of them smiling at something Richard was saying. He looked happy, relieved even, like a weight had been lifted now that I was gone. I pulled out of the driveway and drove home through streets that blurred and swam. When I got back to my small house, I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Martin. "It's me," I said when he answered. "Those documents we talked about. I want to move forward. Now." There was a pause. "You're sure?" I thought about Aaron's face when he told me I should take Richard's maintenance job. I thought about the shame in his eyes when he looked at me. I thought about Vanessa's grip on his arm and Eleanor's poisonous smile. "I'm sure," I said. "Good," Martin said quietly. "I'll have everything ready by Monday. And William, I'm sorry it came to this." So was I. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes people choose who they want to be, and all you can do is let them live with that choice. Monday morning came with rain. I watched it streak down my kitchen window while I drank coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Martin called at 9 sharp. "Everything's ready," he said. "Can you come by the office this afternoon?" I said I could. The rain didn't let up. I drove through gray streets to Martin's downtown office, the kind of building with marble lobbies and security desks, the kind of place that would have surprised Aaron if he'd ever bothered to ask where his old man sometimes went. Martin met me at the elevator, his expression grave. "Before we do this," he said as we walked to his office, "I need to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain?" I thought about Saturday night, about Aaron's words, about the relief on his face when I left. "I'm certain." Martin's office overlooked the city, rain blurring the skyline into watercolor streaks. He pulled out a folder, thick with documents, and spread them across his desk. "I've structured it exactly as you requested," he said. "The trust for your grandson, if Aaron ever has children, is ironclad. They'll be taken care of, educated, given opportunities. But Aaron himself receives nothing unless specific conditions are met, conditions I think we both know he won't fulfill." I picked up the first document, scanning the legal language that meant I was cutting my son out of my life in the most permanent way possible. "And the rest?" Martin pulled out another set of papers. "Your estate, the consulting firm, the investments, everything else goes to the charities we discussed. The homeless shelter, the scholarship fund for kids from low-income families, the community center." He paused. "Ironically, you're leaving your fortune to help people exactly like the man Aaron thinks you are." I signed the first document, then the second, then the third. My hand didn't shake. I thought it might, but it didn't. When I finished, Martin gathered the papers carefully. "There's one more thing," he said. "The letter you asked me to draft. The one Aaron will receive after you're gone." He pulled out a sealed envelope. "Are you sure you want to include this? It's brutal, William." I took the envelope. On the front, in Martin's precise handwriting, was my son's name. Inside was the truth. All of it. The money I'd had all along. The test I'd put him through. The reasons why he'd failed. And the consequences of his choices. "He needs to know," I said quietly. "He needs to understand what he lost and why." Martin nodded slowly. "He'll have to live with this for the rest of his life. With knowing he had a wealthy father who watched him choose cruelty over loyalty. Who saw him pick status over family. That's a heavy burden." "He chose it," I said. "Not me." I left Martin's office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. The rain had stopped, but the sky stayed gray. I drove home slowly, taking streets I didn't need to take, past the neighborhood where I grew up, past the park where I'd taught Aaron to throw a baseball. I wondered if he remembered any of it, or if Vanessa's world had erased all of that, painted over it with country clubs and charity galas and expensive dinner parties where poor fathers were punchlines. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Aaron's name on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, then answered. "Dad?" he said, and his voice sounded strained. Tired. "Hey, son." There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background. He was in his car. "I wanted to apologize for Saturday," he said. "Things got a little out of hand. I should have handled it better." Should have handled it better. Not, "I'm sorry for what I said." Not, "I was wrong to let them treat you that way." Just a vague acknowledgement that things hadn't gone smoothly. "It's fine," I said, and I meant it. Because it was fine now. I'd made my peace. "No, it's not," Aaron said, and for a second he sounded like my son again. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about them humiliating you, and you're right. They were out of line." Hope flickered in my chest, dangerous and unwelcome. And I talked to Vanessa about it. She agrees that her parents can be, well, intense. She's going to speak to them. The hope died. He'd talked to Vanessa, not realized it himself, not stood up in the moment. He'd needed his wife's permission to acknowledge that watching your father get mocked was wrong. "That's good," I said flatly. "Yeah," Aaron said, missing my tone entirely. "So I was thinking, maybe we could have dinner, just the two of us. Like old times. What do you say?" I looked at my small house, at the life I'd built in secret, at the documents sitting on my passenger seat that had just written my son out of my will. "When?" I asked. "How about Thursday? There's this great steakhouse downtown. My treat." His treat. Using money from the job his in-laws had probably helped him get, trying to buy back something he didn't even realize he'd lost. "Okay," I said. "Thursday." I could hear his relief through the phone. "Great. I'll text you the details, and Dad, I really am sorry about everything." He hung up before I could respond. I sat in my car, in my driveway, and I thought about that dinner, about sitting across from my son one more time, about whether to tell him the truth or let him keep living in his carefully constructed world where I was the failure and he was the success, about whether there was anything left to save or if we were both just going through motions, pretending we were still family when the ties had already been cut. Thursday came faster than I wanted. I drove downtown in the rain, found the steakhouse Aaron had chosen, the kind of place with valet parking and a waiting list unless you knew someone. I parked on the street instead, fed the meter, and walked in wearing the same worn blazer I'd worn to his house. The hostess looked at me dubiously until I gave Aaron's name. "Oh," she said, her expression shifting to something like pity. "Mr. Peterson's guest. Right this way." She led me through a dining room full of expensive suits and designer dresses to a table in the back. Aaron was already there, looking at his phone. He glanced up when I approached and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, thanks for coming." I sat down. "Of course." The waiter appeared immediately, young and overly attentive. "Can I start you gentlemen with something to drink?" Aaron ordered wine I'd never heard of. I ordered water. When the waiter left, Aaron leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You look tired," he said. "I am tired," I admitted. He nodded like he understood, but he didn't. How could he? "I've been thinking a lot since Saturday," Aaron said. "About us, about our relationship." I waited. He fiddled with his napkin. "I know I haven't been the best son lately. I've been focused on my career, on building a life with Vanessa, and I've let that take priority over everything else. Over you." It sounded rehearsed, like something Vanessa had helped him write. "You're building your life," I said. "That's what you're supposed to do." He looked relieved. "Exactly. But that doesn't mean I don't care about you, about where you are and what you're doing, where I am, what I'm doing. like I was a project, a problem to be solved. "I'm doing fine," I said. Aaron hesitated. "Are you, though?" "Because I worry, Dad. About your situation, about your future." The waiter returned with our drinks and took our order. Aaron got the most expensive steak on the menu. I got the cheapest. After the waiter left, Aaron leaned forward. "I've been talking with Richard," he said, "about that maintenance position. It's still available if you want it. Full-time, benefits, steady income. It could really help you get back on your feet." I took a sip of water. "I told you I don't need help." "But you do," Aaron said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Dad, I know you're proud. I know you want to do things on your own, but pride doesn't pay bills. At some point, you have to be practical. Practical, like accepting scraps from people who look down on me, like letting my son's father-in-law give me a pity job so they could all feel good about themselves. What if I told you," I said slowly, "that I don't need Richard's job, that I've been fine all along?" Aaron's expression shifted to confusion. "What do you mean?" I could have told him then, could have explained everything, but I wanted to see how deep his assumptions ran. "I mean, maybe you don't know as much about my situation as you think you do." He frowned. "Dad, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm trying to help. You live in that tiny rental. You drive a car that's older than my marriage. You wear the same clothes you've worn for years. I'm not blind." "No," I said quietly. "You just see what you expect to see." He sat back, defensive now. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you decided a long time ago what kind of person I was, what kind of life I lived, and you never questioned it." Aaron's face hardened. "Because it's true. Dad, I grew up watching you struggle, watching you work yourself to the bone for barely enough. I lived it. Don't try to rewrite history now." The food arrived, interrupting us. We ate in tense silence for a while. The steak was good, probably the best I'd had in years, but it tasted like ash. "Do you think I was too forgiving here? Would you have told him the truth, or would you have let him keep believing the lie?" Finally, Aaron set down his fork. "Look," he said, "I didn't ask you here to fight. I wanted to clear the air, to tell you that I'm sorry for how things have been, and that I want to do better. Be better." He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." I did. Inside was a check, $5,000, made out to me, from Aaron and Vanessa Peterson. I stared at it for a long moment. "We want to help you," Aaron said. "Get you into a better place. Maybe a newer car. Whatever you need. $5,000, a fraction of what I made in a week, offered to me like charity by my own son." I looked up at him. "You think this is what I need?" "I think it's a start," he said. "I know it's not much, but it's something. And if you take Richard's job, you can start building real stability, maybe even save up for retirement." I folded the check carefully and set it on the table between us. "Aaron," I said, "I need to tell you something." He looked wary. "Okay. I'm not poor," I said simply. He blinked. "What?" "I'm not poor. I never have been. I have money, Aaron. More than you can probably imagine. I just chose not to spend it. I chose to live simply because I wanted you to grow up without being spoiled, without thinking that wealth was the measure of a person's worth." The color drained from his face. You can't be serious." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and turned it toward him. "Look." He stared at the screen, at the balance that had more zeros than he'd probably ever seen in one place, at the investment accounts, at the business holdings. His mouth opened and closed. This can't be real." "It's real," I said. "I run a consulting firm. I have for 20 years. I've made good investments. I've built wealth quietly because I didn't want it to define me or you. I wanted you to make your own way." Aaron was shaking his head, his face pale. "But the house, the car, everything." "A choice," I said. not a necessity. I wanted to teach you that happiness doesn't come from things. That character matters more than money. That how you treat people, especially people you think have less than you, defines who you really are. Understanding was dawning in his eyes, and with it, horror. Saturday night, he whispered. At our house, Eleanor and Richard, the maintenance job. I was testing you, I said quietly. Testing all of you. I wanted to see how you'd treat someone you thought was poor, someone you thought was beneath you. And you failed, Aaron. You all failed. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. People at nearby tables looked over. You were testing me? This whole time you were playing some kind of game? It wasn't a game, I said. It was a lesson, one you clearly needed. His hands were shaking. So what, you let them humiliate you on purpose? Let me think you were struggling? What kind of father does that? The kind who wants his son to have integrity, I said. The kind who wants to know if his son would stand by him when he had nothing. And the answer is no, Aaron, you wouldn't. Tears were forming in his eyes now, but I couldn't tell if they were from shame or anger. You should have told me. You should have trusted me. How could I asked. When you've spent years being ashamed of me. When you've let your wife and her family treat me like garbage. When you offered me a maintenance job like it was charity. He was crying openly now. I was trying to help you. I thought you needed it. I know, I said, and I felt my own throat tighten. That's the tragedy, Aaron. You thought you were better than me. You thought you'd risen above your poor, embarrassing father, and you never questioned whether that made you someone worth respecting. I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and left enough cash to cover both meals and a generous tip. Where are you going? Aaron asked, his voice breaking. Home, I said. But before I go, I want you to know something. I've changed my will. You're not in it anymore. Everything I've built, everything I've saved, it's going to charity, to people who actually need it. Your children, if you ever have any, will be taken care of through a trust. But you get nothing. His face crumbled. Dad, please. When I die, I continued, you'll receive a letter explaining all of this, explaining why I did what I did and what you lost. And you'll have to live with that, Aaron, with knowing that you had a father who loved you enough to teach you values, and you chose money and status over him anyway, with knowing that you failed the only test that really mattered. I turned to leave. He grabbed my arm. Wait, please. We can fix this. I can change. I can be better. I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his face, at my son who I'd raised and loved and apparently failed to reach. Maybe you can, I said quietly, but not for me. Not anymore. I'm done being your cautionary tale, your embarrassment, your charity case. I'm done, Aaron. I pulled my arm free and walked out of the restaurant. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I got in my old car, started the engine, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see Aaron standing on the sidewalk in the rain, the check still in his hand, watching me disappear. I drove home through wet streets, my vision blurred by rain and tears I didn't want to acknowledge. When I got to my small house, I sat in the driveway for a long time, engine running, heat blasting, and I thought about the life I'd lived and the son I'd lost. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from Aaron. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and watched the sun rise through my thin curtains. My phone rang again. Aaron. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 5 minutes later. Again, I ignored it. This pattern continued for 3 days. Calls, texts, voicemails I didn't listen to. On the 4th day, Vanessa called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Mr. Peterson, she said, her voice cold and clipped. We need to talk about Aaron. Do we? I asked. He's devastated, she said. He hasn't eaten in days. He can barely sleep. Whatever you said to him at that dinner, it broke something. Good, I thought, but didn't say. He told me what you did, Vanessa continued. The money you've been hiding, the test, all of it, and I have to say I think it's incredibly manipulative and cruel. Do you? I said flatly. Yes, she said. You let us believe you were poor. You let us try to help you, and then you threw it back in our faces like we were the villains. We were trying to be kind. You were trying to feel superior, I corrected. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. Aaron loves you, she said finally. Despite everything, he loves you. And you're destroying him. No, I said. I'm showing him who he's become. What you and your family have turned him into. If that's destroying him, maybe he needed to be destroyed.